Ethan Cole measured his mornings in quiet victories. Shoes tied without complaint. Lunch packed with Lily's favorite apple slices. A backpack zipped before the bus arrived. He learned to move efficiently because efficiency left room for gentleness. And gentleness was the only thing that steadied him after his wife died. At 34, he lived between calendars and bedtime stories, between spreadsheets at work and the soft weight of his daughter's head on his shoulder at night. The house was modest, but it breathed with them, warm, careful, and intentionally calm. Work demanded a different version of him. At Hawthorne Solutions, Ethan managed operations with a steadiness that came from knowing what disorder cost. He spoke little in meetings, but when he did, the room listened. That was partly because Madeline Harper listened. Madeline was the kind of leader people admired from a distance. She wore success as if it were tailored to her. Clean lines, controlled expressions, a reputation for turning chaos into outcomes. At 38, she had climbed higher than most and carried the weight without complaint. To her team, she was decisive and fair. To the board, indispensable. To Ethan, she was simply his boss, demanding, sharp, and in moments that caught him off guard, quietly human. Their exchanges were efficient. She asked for updates. He delivered them. She challenged assumptions. He corrected the model. He noticed small things, how she paused before meetings as if bracing, how she stayed late even when no one asked her to. He did not mistake observation for intimacy. He had learned, painfully, that clarity mattered. Madeline noticed him too. Not in the way rumors like to invent, but in the way leaders notice reliability. Ethan never asked for exceptions when Lily was sick. He rearranged his hours and caught up later. He didn't trade on sympathy. He didn't overshare. When Madeline once apologized for a late-night request, he smiled and said, "It's part of the job," and meant it. She filed that away. Her marriage rarely entered the office. When it did, it was in fragments, an anniversary mentioned without warmth, a weekend referenced without detail. Richard Harper was a name, a title, a silhouette. Madeline kept that part of her life sealed, as if professionalism required silence. The night the seal cracked was supposed to be simple. A company milestone, a restaurant reserved too far in advance to cancel, a toast that had been rehearsed. Madeline gave the speech with practiced ease, her voice confident, her smile controlled. The applause was real. The relief afterward was quieter. She stayed longer than usual. Accepted a second drink she didn't need. Laughed at something that wasn't funny. Ethan noticed because he always noticed the margins. When the crowd thinned, she looked suddenly tired, the way people do when the performance ends and the cost arrives. "I'm fine," she said, when he asked if she wanted water. It was a reflex, not a statement. When it became clear she shouldn't drive, Ethan didn't hesitate. Responsibility was muscle memory. He told himself this was nothing more than making sure a colleague got home safely. He told himself that because it was true. The drive was quiet first. City lights slid past the windshield. Madeline stared ahead, her hands folded as if holding something in place. She thanked him, then stopped talking. Ethan didn't fill the silence. He had learned that silence was sometimes the kindest thing you could offer the AT her building. She hesitated before opening the door. "I don't usually." She stopped, shook her head, and managed a small, embarrassed smile. "Thank you. Really." Inside, the apartment was immaculate in the way rooms become when no one lives loudly in them. Ethan set his keys down, waiting only long enough to be sure she was steady. He intended to leave. Intention, however, is not the same as momentum. Madeline poured herself water and leaned against the counter, the confidence of the evening gone. "I hate that everyone thinks I have it all figured out," she said, not looking at him. Ethan stood by the door. "You don't owe anyone certainty." She glanced up, surprised, then looked away again. "At work, I do." He didn't argue. He had no business dismantling her beliefs. "Still," he said, "at work, you deliver results. That's different." The words landed with a softness that surprised them both. Madeline's shoulders eased just slightly. She spoke then, not about strategy or timelines, but about pressure, the constant vigilance, the sense that if she slowed down, everything would slip. She didn't mention Richard. She didn't have to. Absence has its own language. Ethan listened. He shared little, but what he shared mattered. Lily's science project, the quiet after bedtime, the way grief doesn't announce itself, it waits. He didn't ask for pity. He didn't ask for anything. When the clock moved past a reasonable hour, Madeline waved toward the living room. "You can crash on the couch," she said, quickly adding, "if you want. I mean, if it's safer." He hesitated, then nodded. Safety was a word he respected. Morning arrived clean and bright, the city sounding awake and indifferent. Ethan rose early, intent on leaving before awkwardness had time to form. Madeline appeared in the doorway, hair loose, a mug warming her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night sat between them, unremarkable and heavy. She cleared her throat. "About last night," she began, then stopped. Her gaze held his, searching, steady. "If things were different, would you have stayed?" The question wasn't an invitation. It was a fracture. Ethan felt it open, felt the careful compartments of his life shift under the pressure of something he hadn't planned for and didn't yet understand. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He thanked her again and stepped into the hall, the door closing softly behind him. As he walked away, he knew only this. The question would not stay in that apartment. It would follow him home. Ethan Cole carried the question with him for days, not as a temptation, but as a weight. It surfaced while he packed Lily's lunch, while he waited through red lights, while he answered emails that required more certainty than he felt. He didn't replay the night in images. He replayed it in pauses, the moment Madeline Harper had looked at him as if the world had narrowed to a single, fragile possibility. He told himself that unanswered questions lose their power. He was wrong at AT work. Madeline changed. Not dramatically, not in ways that invited comment, but enough for Ethan to notice. She became more precise with him, her requests cleaner, her tone carefully neutral. In meetings, she deferred to him with an extra beat of respect, as if acknowledging something unspoken. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. She didn't linger either. The restraint felt deliberate. Ethan welcomed the distance. He needed it to remind himself of the lines that mattered. He left on time more often, declined after-hours conversations, kept his focus on deliverables. He told himself that discipline was the same as resolution. Still, when Madeline emailed him late one evening, just a document, no message, his pulse ticked up before he steadied it. Lily noticed the restlessness. She asked why he was quiet at dinner, why he checked his phone and then set it face down. Ethan smiled and told her he was tired. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. He read an extra chapter that night, held the light on longer, as if proximity could anchor him. The first crack came during a routine review. Madeline asked him to stay back after the room cleared. Her voice was professional, but the request tightened something in his chest. When the door closed, she gestured to the chair across from her and folded her hands, a posture he recognized from negotiations. "I don't want there to be ambiguity," she said, "about expectations or boundaries." He nodded. "Neither do I." She searched his face, measuring sincerity. "I crossed one," she continued, the admission precise. "Not by what happened, by what I asked." Ethan appreciated the clarity. "We're both responsible for where we stop," he said. "We stop." "Yes," Madeline agreed, then exhaled. "Good." The conversation should have ended there. Instead, silence expanded, carrying more than either intended. Madeline's composure slipped for a breath, and in that breath, something honest surfaced. "I don't want to feel invisible anymore," she said quietly. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He had learned that some truths demand care. "I see you," he said, choosing the words as if they could cut or heal. "At work, as a leader." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile. "That's not the same." "No," he agreed, and stood, signaling the end. He left before the distinction could harden into something else. The weeks that followed were careful. Ethan held the line. Madeline respected it. They worked well, better even, as if naming the risk had sharpened their professionalism. Still, connection finds its own channels. A look held a fraction longer. a shared silence that felt like understanding rather than avoidance. Nothing overt, everything charged. Then came the night Lily got sick. Fever, worry, the long hours of watching numbers on a thermometer refused to behave. Ethan emailed Madeline before dawn, apologizing for missing an early call. Her reply arrived within minutes. Take the day. I've got it. He stared at the screen longer than necessary, grateful and unsettled. When he returned to the office, Madeline met him in the hallway, her voice low. How is she? Better, Ethan said. Thank you. She nodded, then hesitated. If you need flexibility, I'll manage, he said gently. He didn't want favors to blur into something else. That restraint made the next moment harder. A late evening, a deadline that refused to budge, the building emptying out until only their floor remained lit. They worked side by side, problem-solving in the rhythm they shared. When the solution finally clicked, relief broke through their reserve. Madeline laughed, surprised by the sound. You're good at this, she said, meaning more than the task. So are you, Ethan replied. The words were simple. The intention was not. She didn't offer the couch this time. She offered tea. They sat at opposite ends of the table, the space between them a deliberate choice. Madeline spoke about pressure again, but this time she named it. How her marriage had become a ledger of obligations, how conversation had thinned to logistics. She spoke without bitterness, which made it worse. Ethan listened, his hands wrapped around a mug he didn't need. He spoke of Lily, of the way responsibility can feel like love when you let it. He didn't speak of loneliness. It was there anyway. When the clock demanded a decision, he stood. I should go. Madeline didn't stop him. She walked him to the door, the night pressing close. For a moment, they stood in a shared stillness that felt earned and dangerous. Thank you for not pretending I didn't ask, she said. Thank you for respecting the answer I didn't give, Ethan replied. She nodded, accepting the limits. As the door closed, Ethan felt both relieved and diminished, as if he had preserved something by refusing it and lost something by the same act. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the quiet waited. Ethan drove home, knowing that discipline had kept them safe for now. But safety, he understood, was not the same as Ethan Cole tried to convince himself that distance was enough, but the gap between intention and feeling had narrowed. Every interaction with Madeline Harper carried a subtle tension, the kind that lingered in hallways and over email threads, the kind that made ordinary instructions feel like conversations loaded with unspoken weight. He recognized it immediately. Emotional infidelity didn't arrive with grand gestures. It arrived quietly, in stolen attention, in empathy that became dependency. Tea home, Lily sensed his distraction. She tugged at his sleeve during dinner, asking him questions about school projects he barely registered. Ethan answered mechanically, smiling too quickly, his mind elsewhere. He hated the way his own silence created a wall between him and the one person who needed him completely. Each night, after Lily's head hit the pillow and she whispered goodnight, he lingered in the dim kitchen, staring at his coffee, knowing that he had begun giving pieces of himself away in small increments. That Madeline's presence at work grew more charged. She started walking by his office door a little longer than necessary, lingering with papers that could have waited. Her tone softened when she spoke to him, though it remained professional enough to avoid suspicion. Colleagues noticed nothing, but Ethan felt the weight of her observation in every glance. Her dependence, subtle and unspoken, gnawed at the edges of his conscience. He wanted to step back, but feared leaving a silence she might fill in ways neither of them could control. Sophia Bennett, his colleague and friend, began to notice a change in him. She never asked directly, but her eyes followed him with quiet concern during late hours. You're working too hard, she said one evening, and staring at your screen like it's the only thing keeping you sane. Ethan smiled, deflecting. He didn't tell her that it wasn't work that held his attention. It was the memory of a night he had helped Madeline home, the way her question had lodged itself in his chest. He didn't need advice. He needed clarity, but clarity was elusive. Madeline invited him to a late strategy session one night, ostensibly to review quarterly projections. The office was empty except for them. The hum of air conditioning and distant traffic, the only soundtrack. As they went over charts and numbers, Ethan noticed the subtle shift in her posture. Leaning slightly closer when explaining her points, a quiet intensity in her voice that transcended business. He corrected figures and offered suggestions, but his focus wavered. Every glance at her reminded him of vulnerability, of trust given too freely, and the line between duty and personal involvement blurred. "You handled the project exceptionally," she said at the end of the session, her tone carrying a weight beyond professional approval. I don't know what I would have done without your insight." Her eyes held his for longer than usual, and Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Her words weren't flirtation, but they were personal, intimate, and they unsettled him more than any overt advance could have. He nodded, unable to respond adequately, and left with a polite excuse, the air between them taut with things unsaid. Days turned into weeks, each encounter magnifying the invisible tension. Ethan avoided overnights at the office, leaving promptly, trying to rebuild boundaries. Yet, Madeline found small ways to breach them, not in ways obvious to others, but in subtle acts that tethered him emotionally. An email signed with a handwritten, "Thanks for understanding." A quick conversation at the water cooler that lasted a moment too long. A look that lingered when no one else was watching. Each gesture weighed more heavily than the last point one evening. Madeline asked him to stay after work under the guise of resolving an urgent client issue. The office was dark, the soft hum of machines filling the emptiness. As he approached her desk, she looked up, her expression cautious yet sincere. "I appreciate how you've handled things," she said quietly. "More than I can express." Ethan felt the words press against him, not demanding, not expecting, but seeking acknowledgement. He responded with the neutral affirmation of duty, but the sincerity in her eyes made it impossible to dismiss the emotional charge. Her gaze lingered just long enough to leave him unsettled. Returning home, Ethan struggled with guilt that he could not fully define. The night that had been innocuous, the ride home, the quiet conversation, the shared understanding, had rippled into a complexity he hadn't anticipated. He realized that the emotional thread connecting him to Madeline had strengthened despite every effort to resist. It was invisible to the world but tangible to him, and he feared that once such threads existed, pulling them back could fray his own life irreparably. At the tea breakfast, Lily asked about his late night, and he invented a work meeting, careful to mask the tension in his voice. He noticed the small detail she observed, the way he stirred his coffee more slowly, the faint crease between his brows. Lily's perceptiveness reminded him why he needed boundaries, why he couldn't allow himself to slip further. Yet even as he resolved this internally, he sensed Madeline's influence creeping into his daily thoughts. The memory of her voice, her subtle vulnerability, the quiet intensity of her presence lingering in spaces she no longer occupied physically. The tipping point came when Madeline appeared unexpectedly at his office the following morning. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone soft but unyielding. She didn't elaborate, didn't insist, but her eyes carried weight, the kind that left no room for casual refusal. Ethan felt his carefully constructed walls begin to falter, knowing that the conversation would test both restraint and loyalty. His chest tightened, a warning of the consequences yet to come. The emotional gravity pulling him toward a decision that would ripple into every aspect of his life. That he led her to the small conference room, shutting the door with a finality that mirrored his internal conflict. She spoke then, not of numbers or deadlines, but of loneliness and weariness, of feelings she had buried under years of obligation and routine. Ethan listened, words measured, careful. His own emotions rose in quiet counterpoint, yet he maintained a careful distance, recognizing the line he could not cross. And yet, as their eyes met across the table, a silent acknowledgement passed between them, a realization that connection had already grown in ways neither of them could fully control. When the conversation ended, Madeline stood and offered a small, tired smile. "Thank you for listening," she said, voice tinged with relief. "I appreciate it." Ethan nodded, struggling to respond without betraying the undercurrent of feeling that had surfaced. As she left, the conference room felt emptier, yet the weight lingered, pressing on him with the certainty that things could not remain as they had been. He walked back to his office, realizing that emotional boundaries had already begun to blur, and that the question of where responsibility ended and desire began would not remain unanswered for long. Ethan Cole had hoped that time would settle the tension between him and Madeline Harper, that distance and discipline could contain what had begun in a quiet, fleeting night. But some connections, once formed, resist containment. They slip into moments he least expects. A shared glance across a crowded office, the echo of her laughter in an empty hallway, the memory of vulnerability that had been so carefully hidden. Each encounter reminded him that emotional attachment does not respect boundaries, and that restraint is only effective when both hearts are willing. Madeline herself seemed caught in the same unspoken current. She remained professional in public, but small cracks appeared. Moments when she lingered too long at his desk, when her emails carried warmth beyond necessity, when her sighs betrayed exhaustion that had nothing to do with work. Ethan recognized the signals, tried to rationalize them as remnants of stress, but the patterns were undeniable. She relied on him emotionally, just as he had begun relying on the unspoken connection between them. And every time he realized this, guilt pressed heavier against him. Like a tea home, Lily became the silent witness to his distraction. She would ask simple questions about homework, about a story she had read, about the day's small triumphs, and Ethan would answer, but his mind drifted. He forced himself to focus, to smile genuinely, but the memory of Madeline lingered like a shadow across his consciousness. Even bedtime routines felt longer, more deliberate, as if staying present could anchor him to the life that truly mattered. And yet, the pull of something forbidden, something unacknowledged, kept intruding. The first confrontation with inevitability occurred during a late-night work session. Madeline asked him to stay behind after everyone else had left, citing a last-minute client report that needed reconciliation. The office was quiet, almost empty, the glow of computers reflecting in polished surfaces. As they worked side by side, Ethan noticed subtle shifts, her proximity, her tone, the way her eyes sought his when explaining details. They spoke of the report, of numbers and deadlines, but under the surface, there was something more, a tension neither of them named aloud. "I don't know how I would manage without your guidance," Madeline said quietly, her voice low, almost vulnerable. She didn't need to say more. The words carried their own weight. Ethan felt the pull in his chest, the tug between professional duty and the human instinct to offer reassurance, to comfort, to stay. He told himself to remain neutral, to maintain the boundary, but his body and mind betrayed him. The emotional gravity between them had grown beyond casual acknowledgement. Weeks passed with the same pattern. Ethan stayed careful, creating schedules to avoid unnecessary encounters. Madeline followed her routines, but her presence lingered in ways he couldn't escape. Every meeting, every brief interaction carried the unspoken weight of their last conversation. Each word, gesture, and pause became charged with meaning. Emotional infidelity, he realized, was not a single act but a slow accumulation of moments, each small and seemingly innocuous, yet powerful in their cumulative effect. The situation escalated when Madeline unexpectedly arrived at his office early one morning. "Can we talk?" she asked, not demanding, but with an intensity that left no room for casual dismissal. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest as he nodded and led her to the conference room. The office, empty and silent, seemed to hold its breath with them. He knew the conversation would be pivotal, not in terms of scandal, but in the reckoning of emotional boundaries. Madeline began softly, her words careful yet revealing, "I can't ignore the way I feel. I don't expect anything, and I don't want to disrupt your life. I just need you to understand that what I'm feeling, it's real." Her eyes searched his, vulnerable yet unwavering. Ethan sat still, absorbing the weight of her honesty. He wanted to offer comfort, but he also wanted to protect the life he had built with Lily. He understood then that emotional attachment could be as destructive as physical betrayal if left unchecked. But he spoke cautiously, selecting each word with deliberate care. "I understand," he said, voice measured, "and I value honesty. But I also have responsibilities, one very important responsibility at home. I cannot compromise that." Madeline nodded, as if expecting nothing else, yet the quiet intensity in the room remained. Ethan recognized that acknowledging her feelings did not mean indulging them. It meant recognizing a truth that existed outside his control. The conversation ended with a mutual, fragile respect. Madeline left, leaving Ethan in the stillness of the office, aware that the unspoken bond between them had shifted irreversibly. He walked to his desk, feeling both relief and unease, knowing that emotional boundaries had been tested and that the consequences would ripple through both their lives. The tension was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, and it required careful management moving forward. At the tea home that evening, Lily greeted him with a story about her day, full of excitement and small triumphs. Ethan smiled and listened, fully present this time, determined to anchor himself in the life that mattered most. Yet, in the quiet moments, he reflected on the morning conversation, understanding that some connections, once recognized, could never be entirely undone. They demanded honesty, self-awareness, and vigilance. Madeline's presence persisted in subtle ways: emails, shared tasks, fleeting eye contact. But Ethan now approached each interaction with deliberate mindfulness. He acknowledged the reality of their connection without succumbing to it, protecting both his professional integrity and his personal life. The emotional line was thin, the balance precarious, but he understood that vigilance was the only safeguard against a deeper entanglement. The section closes with Ethan sitting alone in his living room, the soft hum of the evening settling around him. He reflected on the delicate balance he had maintained, aware that emotional attachment, once awakened, could influence choices long after moments had passed. He knew that responsibility, honesty, and boundaries would define the next steps. Not desire, not impulse, but conscious decision. And as he looked at Lily asleep in the next room, he realized that safeguarding what mattered most required courage in ways that were far more challenging than any office confrontation. For now, the path forward was uncertain but deliberate. Ethan understood that love, temptation, and duty were interwoven in ways that could not be ignored. The choices ahead would test him, but he was resolved to navigate them with care, knowing that every decision carried weight and that the cost of ignoring truth could extend far beyond a single night or fleeting connection.